The Eastern Conference All-Star reserves were named last night. Unfortunately, Pascal Siakam did not make the roster. So we'll take a look at the team and see if Siakam really deserved to be on the team. Additionally, Brian Windhorst gave some deep insights on the Toronto Raptors trade deadline, where we're positioned in the players that we could acquire if we were to move some of our top talent. Additionally, Fred VanVleet's looking like he's going to get a bag this offseason as the Orlando Magic have been reportedly willing to give him a massive contract this summer. So lots of stuff to break down, and news just dropped that Kyrie Irving has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets, so I'll discuss that as well in this video. Lots of stuff to break down. Without further ado, let's jump to the first topic of discussion. First thing we're taking a look at is Pascal Siakam snubbed from the All-Star game. Now, unfortunately, Pascal Siakam, even though he came to the season much improved, right? His numbers definitely took a significant step forward this year. 25 points per game, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, shooting 47% from the field. Really took the leap as the Toronto Raptors' number one guy, scoring in the paint, facilitating for others. His passing really took the big step up in my eyes, his ability to create for teammates. All that being said, and the fact that he was an All-NBA player last season, he made this leap from a guy that made an All-NBA team last year. Fortunately, didn't make the All-Star team. Now, individually, it's foolish. Pascal Siakam is definitely a lot better than some of the names on this list I'm about to show, but when you give some context, especially how the Toronto Raptors have played this season, some injuries he dealt with at the start of this year, I'm not going to come out here and get that frustrated. But let's take a look at the list first. Joel Embiid, Jaylen Brown, Bam Adebayo, Julius Randle, DeMar DeRozan, Drew Holiday, and Tyrese Halliburton all made the team over Pascal. And, definitely some great players on that list. You're not getting it in over Joel, Jaylen Brown, even Bam Adebayo at this point, even though Bam, I think Pascal's had a better season than Bam. I think he's a better player than Jaylen Brown. DeMar DeRozan's the one I see a lot of people sort of frustrated with, getting how did DeMar DeRozan's stats aren't as good. The Bulls are barely better than the Raptors at this point. Well, first, I'm not going to roast a Raptors legend out there, DeMar DeRozan. He's been overlooked his entire career. I'm happy he ended up making this team, but I think DeMar's putting up similar-ish stats, a similarly bloated stat line, similar to what Pascal's putting up. Pascal's numbers are better, especially in the rebounds and assist categories, but it's DeMar's on the slightly marginally better team, and he's played more games than Pascal this year. So I think those are the two things that edged him into the roster over Pascal. Again, with the New York Knicks and Julius Randle, they're a lot better team. They needed to have one representative. A lot of people are frustrated that Jalen Brunson didn't make the squad. And then Drew Holiday and Tyrese Halliburton, you had to have some guards in there on the team. So they weren't even really competing with Pascal, even though I would pick Pascal over both of those guys. James Harden's the dude that really should have made it over one of Holiday or Tyrese Halliburton, but I'm not going to back the guy that was flopping all over the place in the playoffs. But again, Pascal Siakam's had a remarkable year. This shouldn't take anything away from his season this year, but it's unfortunately he didn't make the team, but I'm not going to get too shook up over it. But let me know what you guys think about him getting snubbed from the All-Star team this year. But one guy that never gets snubbed from All-Star teams is LeBron James. And our partners over at CoolBet, the best sports book you can use if you're interested in betting, sports betting, definitely check out the CoolBet app using the link down below. You can bet on NBA games, Toronto Raptors games, really any sport in general, and bet on some interesting LeBron James bets. It's looking like he's going to pass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's scoring record soon, and you can bet on whether or not the field goal or the points that he passes Kareem with will be a 2-pointer, a 3-pointer, or a free throw, or you can bet on whether or not it will be assisted. So, a lot of fun stuff there if you're interested in sports betting. Definitely use the CoolBet app, right? They're regulated in Ontario, and they got some interesting lines. They got some interesting bets that are not available at other sports books. So definitely check it out. It's free to sign up using the link in the description down below. But the next thing we're taking a look at is Brian Windhorst, giving some major insights into the Toronto Raptors trade deadline. Now, Brian Windhorst is a guy that really has boosted his reputation as an insider of the past year. Combating Woj last trade deadline about James Harden potentially getting traded to the Sixers. He called it basically a week before Woj, saying it's going to happen, while Woj was sort of denying it. And then the summer, where will Rudy go? What's happening down there in Utah? And then Rudy Gobert and all those guys get traded. But Windhorst gave a lot of time discussing the Toronto Raptors ahead of this year's trade deadline on his Hoop Collective podcast, and gave some deep insights into what the Toronto Raptors are looking like. I don't have any screenshots since it was a podcast, got a little notes here, but basically he was talking about how the Toronto Raptors are really the team that everyone is looking at ahead of this year's trade deadline. They're the team that holds all the cards, and that might have changed in the last hour with the Brooklyn Nets. Kyrie Irving asking out, and who knows what will happen with Kevin Durant. But the Toronto Raptors, at least at this point, at least the point of his his report, his podcast, the Toronto Raptors hold all the cards. Teams are looking to see what Toronto will do, regardless of what happens to Kyrie and stuff. They will still be a major piece, a major factor at play. But one player that everyone is looking at is OG Anunoby. There's potentially 6 to 7 teams that would make a significant offer for OG. As we broke down yesterday, there were reports that there were a bidding war, especially between the New Orleans Pelicans and Memphis Grizzlies going on at this point. But Windhorst sort of gave us an update on that front, saying the Grizzlies, while they do have some assets, right? You have Zaire Williams, you have your draft picks and stuff. They don't seem to be willing to give the type of offer that would really move the needle in an OG Anunoby trade, especially with how competitive the market has been, right, when competing with other teams. And 2 teams that he said to really look at and focus in on is the New Orleans Pelicans as well as the Portland Trailblazers. As the Pelicans have guys like Dyson Daniels, they also have that LA Lakers pick swap, right, which could potentially become Victor Wembanyama the way the seasons have been going for them, right? That could be a cool acquisition in for an OG Anunoby deal. Jose Alvarado, Herb Jones, the list goes on. Trey Murphy III, Jackson Hayes, a lot of assets could be going back to Toronto. And, then you look at the Portland Trailblazers. A deal potentially could happen if OG is available and stuff, which it does indicate that he is. That a deal surrounding Shaedon Sharpe, some draft capital could end up going back to the Toronto Raptors. So lots of stuff, lots of teams that have been discussed, but basically there's a lot of teams bidding on OG Anunoby right now, and the different packages that are being offered are either young players or a lot of draft capital. It doesn't seem like there's a big overlap of both, but we'll see what actually ends up going down with OG on that front. And he also gave some insight into Fred VanVleet's situation, where he talking about how he switched agents, and that could be a move, a play for him to get a bigger contract. We'll talk about that in the next segment. But, discussing how the Clippers especially have Brandon Botson, they have Luke Kennard, and they have Terrence Mann, and they're interested in getting a point guard. Discussed Kyle Lowry was a guy on the list. We've heard these reports before. They're just getting further validated by Brian Windhorst, but it's lots of moving pieces for the Toronto Raptors right now. Lots of potential avenues they could go ahead of this trade deadline. I'm sure it's going to continue to develop ahead of the deadline next Thursday. It can't really come soon enough. The anticipation is building significantly. But we're talking about Fred VanVleet. We'll segue into the next topic, saying the Magic are expected to offer a big contract to Fred VanVleet. Now, Fred VanVleet has been playing a lot better as of late. His averages continue to go up as the season has gone along, right? 19 points per game. He's close back to his 20-point per game mark, close to 7 assists, 34% from the three-point line, getting more and more respectable, right? 1.6 steals. Still getting blown by a bit on the defensive end just from the eye test, but Fred VanVleet's looking more and more like himself. Maybe not the all-star form he was in prior to last year's trade deadline, but looking like a solid player. And Fred VanVleet's a guy that you guys have been roasting me for backing and not criticizing to death out here on the videos, right? Fred VanVleet's a good basketball player, and this is validated by the Orlando Magic being willing to give him a massive contract in free agency, as news has come out that picking up the wrong reports. But regardless of what happens in the February deadline, there are reportedly murmurs that Orlando is willing to throw, quote, a lot of money at Fred VanVleet, who will head into unrestricted free agency this summer, according to Tim McMahon and from the Hoop Collective podcast, saying the Fred VanVleet thing, I think you're going to have to pay pretty close to the max if Orlando smoke is real, which is pretty wild. It's going to have a lot of Toronto Raptors fans frustrated to hear that. The Raptors may have to give close to the maximum sort of contract for Fred VanVleet, which is a big raise on currently what he's getting on a season where he's kind of taken a step back, even though he has played better as of late. So, the Orlando Magic want to give him that bag. Masai Ujiri really has to make a decision before this year's trade deadline, whether or not they want to move on from Fred VanVleet or if they want to give him that contract this summer. Because I'd imagine Fred VanVleet wouldn't mind or would like to stay, given all his comments, his quotes about the future, and his comments in the past that he'd like to stay with Toronto. I don't think he'd leave us for Orlando if we're offering similar contracts. It's just, will the Raptors give him that type of money? That's the real question. And If we don't think we will, or if we don't think we should offer him that contract, we have to trade him ahead of this year's deadline. We can't let him walk for nothing. But if we think he is that guy, is the guy we want to bring back in return, then we should ride it out, see what happens, give him the contract, and I imagine he'd stay. I don't think he'd leave for Orlando, but there's going to be a pretty cost for Fred VanVleet. So let me know what you guys think about that in the comment section below. But the final thing we're discussing in this video is Kyrie Irving. This dude, man. I'm going to talk more about this on Courtside Digest so I get a little bit more info. I'm sort of reacting to this. Had a Woj bomb, an absolutely wild Woj bomb come out saying that Kyrie Irving has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. From everything I've gathered, there's no list just yet in terms of teams, but he is looking to make his way to go to LA, but the contract situation has worked out in such a way that the Nets don't want to give him an extension. They don't want to bring him back beyond this season, and they couldn't get much value for him in the summer in terms of potential trade, but their game plan was essentially that Kyrie Irving will have to likely, in order for him to sign with a team that he'd like to sign to, he'd have to be traded in a sign-and-trade, so the Nets would still be able to get assets back, and they'd be able to ride out the season and see what he could provide to the team. But since Kyrie Irving sort of figured out that's what the Nets' plans were, going into this trade deadline, that they're not going to move him, they don't want to bring him back beyond next year, he just came out and said, hey, I want out. I want to be traded ahead of this year's trade deadline. Made a cryptic tweet basically saying, stay as far away as possible from your enemies and stuff. A little bit hypocritical given the fact he was the one out there roasting James Harden last year's trade deadline. He's a guy that's very commendable at times, or he was very complimentary of Harden, saying, he has to do what he wants to do, and then says, he quit on this team and all that sort of stuff. Very two-faced his media approach to James Harden, and now he's doing the exact same thing. Kevin Durant goes down with injury a little bit. He requests a trade. What do you expect from Kyrie? What do you expect? And how does this impact the Toronto Raptors? I don't think you'll ever see Kyrie Irving in a Toronto Raptors uniform, so I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe, who knows what could happen in 5 days. But as Brian Windhorst sort of brought up, the Raptors had all the leverage. They were sort of the team everyone was looking at heading into this year's trade deadline, and now the Brooklyn Nets have also inserted themselves into that discussion. So, we'll keep our eyes posted on what's happening on that. As said, I'm going to make a video on this on Courtside Digest literally right now, so with more insight, more feel. So check out that video when that's out. But folks, you guys are best for making it this far. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Right? Check out the CoolBet Sportsbook app. Helps us out big time. But again, we've been pushing out content. So if you want to stay up to date with everything surrounding the trade deadline, the Toronto Raptors, right, hit that sub button. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.